All right, we're back, and I wanted to talk about another thesis, another way of looking at superhero stories, specifically superhero television and film. This idea that the superhero is basically a Western. Now, I have to give credit where credit is due. The best articulation of this argument that I have read is from Jess Nevins. Now, we've talked about Jess before. You have got a chapter from his book in progress as part of your reading list. Jess Nevins is a research librarian, and he writes encyclopedias, including encyclopedias of the pulps, which were cheap novels, popular novels written in the 20s and 30s and 40s period. He's also written encyclopedias of Victorian literature, and is an encyclopedia of Golden Age and superheroes. And the book he's working on right now is about the origin of the superhero and where the superhero's sort of family lineage goes back through mythology and history. But in that book, which you will read a first chapter of, Jess argues that the central dilemma of the superhero story is that society, the community, the town, the city, whatever it is, comes under threat. And they can only be saved by the man with the gun. But the man with the gun is dangerous. He threatens society. And so he is not welcome in society after he saves it. So society can only be saved by the guy with the gun, but the guy with the gun is not welcome in the society that he saves. And he's a perpetual outsider because he's the man with the gun. He's necessary, but ostracized because he's dangerous. And a good example of this, let's just get a good Western example. Let's talk about the man with no name, like Clint Eastwood's character in Sergio Leone's Fistful of Dollars, A Few Dollars More, and The Good, Bad, and the Ugly, which is kind of the quintessential example of this character. The man with no name, Eastwood's character, he helps innocent people. Like at first, you think he's just a mercenary. Like at first, it seems like he's just doing what he's doing for money. He gets these two gangs to kind of fight each other, but he ends up like going out of his way, risking his own life to help innocent people, non-combatants, basically. And he's captured and tortured and undergoes incredible hardship and personal pain and suffering. He puts his life on the line, ultimately for nothing, except to restore order to the town. And then he leaves because he's too dangerous to stay. Like the town will not, they don't want him there. They want him to come and do what he does, come and do what the guy with the gun does. But when you're done, leave. We don't want you to stay because you're a threat to society. So Jess argues that the superhero is an updated version of this problem. This dilemma is the superhero's great dilemma. Well, does it hold up? Let's look at some superhero stories, and there's a lot of them where you see this happening. The hero is constantly isolated. Like Bruce Wayne lives in this giant mansion by himself with him and his butler and an old guy who threatens nobody. Or he lives in a cave, right, that no one's allowed into. He has an outside identity. He has like Bruce Wayne, the socialite. He's constantly with beautiful women and he's partying and drinking. But that's all fake. Like we all understand that not only is that all a pretense, he gets no personal nourishment from that. Those relationships are all insincere. It's an act. Tony Stark lives in this beautiful, magnificent house, beach house, all alone, with nobody to talk to except robots, right? That he makes. He has to make his own friends. The Hulk is constantly trying to escape society and live in the desert or the jungle or the Arctic or anywhere where there aren't any people. Yeah, and again, if you watched our previous lecture, what happens at the end of Avengers 2? He self-exiles himself to space. Why? Because he's too dangerous to be around people. The X-Men have their own community where only mutants are welcome, and they use this as a way to isolate. They talk a game about how, oh, we want mutants to live amongst people, but mutants can only live amongst people when people don't know they're mutants. Like as soon as they become obviously mutant, they display some kind of physical abnormality, they become outsiders. They need to be exiled because they're dangerous. Batman and Spider-Man are both good examples of this notion of the hero being hunted. In The Dark Knight, we had that famous line. It's been repeated a lot, like he's going to be the hero that he's not the hero we deserve, but he's the hero that we need right now. Batman frames himself for murder, for the murder of Harvey Dent, the district attorney, because Harvey Dent is a role model to the city. Harvey Dent's reputation is admirable. And to preserve that admirable reputation, Batman frames himself for Harvey's murder, making himself an outsider, hunted and feared by the people he's protecting. I want to note that since 1963, the catchphrase of the X-Men has been hated and feared by those they are sworn to protect. Like that's this idea of the outsider hero is deeply ingrained, at least in the last 50 years of superhero comics. Bruce's explicit goal in The Dark Knight is to retire Batman so that he can be with Rachel Dawes, the love of his life. This sets up a good connection, a good relationship. That is, the superhero identity is opposed to social ties. And you can only have personal and social satisfaction. You can only have social ties if you give up being the superhero. But the city needs the hero. So what do you do? Now, this is related to our next lecture, which is called The Hero's Choice. But ultimately, what Batman is in here is in a choice situation where you can either pick what's good for you. I'm going to give up being Batman. I'm just going to be me. And we're going to hang out with Rachel, and we're going to get married and have lots of little bouncing baby Waynes. Or you can do what's good for society and give up Rachel or put her off so that you can help the people, so you can help community. You can be selfish or you can be altruistic. I don't want to skip too far ahead in this because we'll get back to it. Spider-Man. So if you remember the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man, he's hunted by the police. He's accused of murder that he didn't commit, and he's hunted by cops. And in all of the films, you got his boss at the newspaper, like J. Jonah Jameson's wonderful portrayal in the Tobey Maguire films, always saying Spider-Man's a menace. Like he controls the press, and he runs stories every day about how Spider-Man is a criminal and an outlaw, and he needs to be arrested or kicked out or driven away. And this is the life of the superhero, or at least of these superheroes. I'm not sure it applies to all of them, but it certainly applies to these two. And again, in Spider-Man 2, the second Tobey Maguire movie, where he specifically gives up his powers. Like he's like, no, I don't want to be Spider-Man anymore. I want to get together with MJ. And it works. Like he gives up his powers and he starts to like excel in life. He starts to have friendships again, and he becomes good in school, and he gets to lavish attention on Mary Jane, and she notices, and it's working. But it never lasts. Integration doesn't last. No, Peter and Mary Jane try a relationship, but the character is rebooted, right? So like Peter and MJ are together for the second and third Spider-Man movies, but then it gets rebooted and the character is back to being a single again, and then his girlfriend dies, so he can't even have that. Tony Stark gives up being Iron Man in his third movie to be with Pepper, but by Avengers 2 and then Civil War, he's back being Iron Man again, and she's left him. The man with the gun is too in Civil War. Let's talk about Civil War. The man with the gun is too dangerous to be left alone. This is the explicit argument in Civil War. Like, the superheroes are too dangerous to be left to govern themselves. They have to be governed by society. You have to take some sort of subordinate role to authority. Somebody has to be in charge of you. And they get to decide what you do and don't get to do. And that's how we're going to control the man with the gun. Or you have to flee society. This is what Captain America ends up doing, right? He ends up leaving society because he's not willing to subordinate himself to authority. In all of these stories, it's important to remember that violence is the determinant thing. The reason why the superhero cannot be accepted by society is not because he's making a noble sacrifice. That's a separate issue. We're going to get to the hero's sacrifice, the hero's choice in a minute. That's the point where Batman has to decide, well, am I going to be with Rachel, or am I going to be with, or am I going to help society? Like, I don't want to talk about that right now. Right now, I'm talking about characters who they're exiled from society because of their power, because they are violent. You see, this is exactly what Civil War is about. Or Daredevil talks about this in season 2. He tries to give up being Daredevil, but he says, you know what? I like this. Like, I like punching people. There's a part of me that gets off on being this. In Civil War, Iron Man, Tony Stark talks about how, well, I tried to retire, but you know what? I kind of like being this guy. I like being Iron Man. That is the superhero as Western. He likes what he is. He is good at it. And there's some satisfaction that comes from being the man with the gun. And because he is violent and the man with the gun, he cannot be trusted to join society, even when he saved it. It's not noble sacrifice. He's not saying, oh, I'm going to give up society. He wants to belong to society. And sometimes he even puts down the gun. Like, you've seen these Westerns, or there's plenty of them, where the story is about a guy who's retired, who's hung up the gun, but now he has to get the gun back out again because society is threatened. And when he does that, and he picks up the gun again, he really becomes dangerous again, not just to the bad guys, but to the society that he's supposedly protecting. And at the end of the film, he has to either retire again and hang up the gun, or he has to accept that he is the gun and he has to leave society. Superhero stories are Westerns, and the superhero is the man with the gun. Question mark. All right. So, like the superhero romance, that's an alternative way of reading these characters, not entirely in sympathy with the romance. All right. We've got more of these lectures, but that's theory number 2. Okay. Thanks.